Disclaimer. Please forgive me now for there may be mispronunciations in this video. There is quite a bit of UFO sightings, and what I mean by quite a bit, I mean hundreds from all over the world. It could be even more than hundreds, but in this case I am about to tell you about is very well known in the US. So let's begin. To get started on this case, we must first explore a few sightings before the July 19th, 1952 sighting occurred. June 24th, 1947, Washington State. Private pilot Kenneth Arnold flies from Chehalis to Yakima over Mount Rainier. He spots something he can't explain. 9 objects flying in a V formation that emit bright lights. Arnold estimates their speed at 1,700 miles per hour. At the time, the airspeed record for human flight is 623 miles per hour. On January 7th, 1948, Fort Knox, Kentucky. A UFO was reported by control tower operators. The unidentified craft floats still near in the gold depository for over an hour. 3 Air Force fighters were sent out and approached the object. The planes pursued it for up to 22,000 feet. 2 pilots turned back, but Captain Thomas Mantell continued on. Later that day, the wreckage of Mantell's plane was found strewn across nearby farmland. Unfortunately, Mantell did not survive the crash. August 1951, Lubbock, Texas. On 13 separate occasions, 3 Texas Tech professors observed green lights passing overhead. On August 31st, a student captures the objects on camera. Hundreds more sightings are reported all over the world. However, it wasn't until one summer night in 1952 when the sightings would become a national security concern. Saturday, July 19th, 1952, around 11:40 p.m. Edward Nugent, an air traffic controller at Washington National Airport, now known as Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport, spotted 7 objects on the radar. It was strange because no known aircraft was in the area they were located, which was 15 miles south-southwest of the city. Nugent's superior, Harry Birnes, a senior air traffic controller at the airport, watched the objects on Nugent's radar scope. We knew immediately that a very strange situation existed. Their movements were completely radical compared to those of ordinary aircraft, said Harry Birnes. To be sure of what they saw, Birnes had 2 controllers check Nugent's radar. They found it was working normally. Birnes called the National Airport's radar-equipped control tower, where Harold Coughlin and Joe Zacco said that they also had unidentified blips on their radar screen and saw a hovering bright light in the sky which flew with incredible speed. Other objects began appearing in all sectors of the radar scope. When they moved over the White House in the United States Capitol, Birnes called the Andrews Air Force Base, located 10 miles from the National Airport. Andrews reported that they had no unusual objects on their radar, and airmen soon called the base's control tower to report the sightings of a strange object. Airman Willen Brady, who was in the tower, then saw an object which appeared to be like an orange ball of fire, trailing a tail unlike anything I had ever seen before. Brady said he would alert the other personnel in the tower, and the strange object took off at an unbelievable speed. Meanwhile, on one of the National Airport's runways, S.C. Pierman, a Capital Airlines pilot, was waiting in the cockpit of his DC-4 for permission to take off. He spotted what he believed was a meteor and was told that the control tower's radar had detected unknown objects closing on his position. Pierman observed 6 objects, white, tailless, fast-moving lights, over a 14-minute period. Pierman was in radio contact with Birnes during his sighting. All while this was happening at Andrews Air Force Base, the control tower personnel were tracking on radar what some thought to be unknown objects. Others suspected that it may be simply stars and meteors. Staff Sergeant Charles Davenport observed an orange-red light to the south. The light would appear to stand still, then make an abrupt change in direction and altitude. This happened several times. At one point, both radar centers at National Airport and the radar at Andrews Air Force Base were tracking the object hovering over a radio beacon when it vanished in all 3 radars at the same time. It was at 3 a.m. when two United States Air Force F-94 Starfire jet fighters from Newcastle Air Force Base in Delaware arrived over Washington. All of the objects vanished from the radar at the National Airport. However, when the jets ran low on fuel and left, the objects returned, which convinced Birnes that the UFOs were monitoring radio traffic and behaving accordingly. The objects were last detected by radar at 5:30 a.m. The sightings made front-page headlines in newspapers around the nation. USAF Captain Edward J. Ruppelt, the supervisor of the Air Force Project Blue Book investigation into UFO sightings, was in Washington at the time. He did not learn about the sightings until Monday, July 21st, when he read the headlines in a Washington area newspaper. He tried to obtain a staff car so he could travel Washington to investigate the sightings, but was refused as only generals and senior colonels could use staff cars. Frustrated, he left Washington and flew back to Blue Book's headquarters at Wright-Patterson AFB in Dayton, Ohio. He spoke to the Air Force radar specialist Captain Roy James, who felt that unusual weather conditions could have caused the unknown radar targets. After the July 19th and 20th sightings, on Saturday, July 26, 1952 at 8:15 p.m., a pilot and a stewardess on a National Airlines flight into Washington observed some lights above their plane. Both radar centers at National Airport and the radar at Andrews AFB were tracking more unknown objects. USAF Master Sergeant Charles E. Cummings visually observed the objects at Andrews and would later say, "These lights did not have the characteristics of shooting stars. There was no trails. They traveled faster than any shooting star I had ever seen." Meanwhile, Albert M. Chop, the press spokesman for Project Blue Book, arrived at National Airport and denied several reporters' requests to photograph the radar screens. He would join the radar center personnel. By this time, which was 9:30 p.m., the radar center was detecting unknown objects in every sector. There were times that the objects traveled slowly, and other times they reversed direction and moved across the radar scope at speeds calculating up to 7,000 miles per hour. At 11:30 p.m., two U.S. Air Force F-94 Starfire jet fighters from Newcastle Air Force Base in Delaware arrived over Washington. Captain John McHugh, the flight leader, saw nothing on the radar blips despite repeated attempts. However, his wingman Lieutenant William Patterson did see 4 white glows and chased them. He told investigators that "I tried to make contact with the boogies below 1,000 feet and that I was at my maximum speed, but I ceased chasing them because I saw no chance of overtaking them." After midnight on July 27th, USAF Major Dewey Fournette, Project Blue Book's liaison at the Pentagon, and Lieutenant John Holcomb, a United States Navy radar specialist, arrived at the radar center at National Airport. During the night, Lieutenant Holcomb received a call from the Washington National Weather Station. They told him that the slight temperature inversion was present over the city, but Holcomb felt the inversion was not nearly strong enough to explain the good and solid returns on the radar scopes. The sightings on July 26th and 27th also made front-page headlines and led President Harry Truman to have his Air Force aide call Ruppelt and ask for an explanation of the sightings and unknown radar returns. Truman listened to the conversation between the two men on a separate phone, but did not ask questions himself. Ruppelt had a conversation with Captain James, which told the president's assistant that the sightings might have been caused by temperature inversion, in which a layer of warm, moist air covers a layer of cool, dry air closer to the ground. This condition can cause radar signals to bend and give false returns. However, Ruppelt had not yet interviewed any of the witnesses or conducted a formal investigation. July 29th, just 3 days after the second event, the Air Force held a press conference at the Pentagon to explain the phenomenon to the public. Air Force Major General John Samford told the gathered reporters that the air traffic controllers and flight pilots must have seen stars, meteors, and other optical illusions, while the radar anomalies would be explained by temperature inversion over the city, making it simply a weather-related event. Ruppelt was not consulted prior to the press conference, and he would go on to publicly denounce the Air Force explanation, saying that the temperature inversions were already well-documented radar anomalies, and what would happen in Washington, D.C. was not related to an inversion. What do you think of these 1950s sightings? Did you like this video and want to support this channel and get early access? Feel free to check out my Patreon page where I create content on cryptids, hauntings, alien abductions, serial killers, and much more. Guess for me there, like, comment, and subscribe here.